April 26, 1986, 1:23 a.m. The world changed forever in a single, catastrophic moment when reactor number 4, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded with a force equivalent to 500 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The blast tore through the reactor core, sending a column of radioactive fire and debris 2 kilometers into the night sky, releasing more radiation than had ever been unleashed in a single accident in human history for nearly 4 decades. The images from that terrible night have haunted our collective memory. Aerial photographs of the destroyed reactor, the evacuated ghost city of Pripyat, the brave liquidators walking into radioactive hell to prevent an even greater catastrophe. But among the thousands of photographs taken in the immediate aftermath, one image has remained hidden in Soviet archives until recently, a close-up shot that reveals a gesture so subtle, yet so profound, that it fundamentally changes our understanding of what really happened that night. The photograph shows Valery Petrovich, a senior reactor operator who had worked at Chernobyl for over a decade. In the image, taken just hours after the explosion, Petrovich stands amid the chaos of the emergency response, his face streaked with soot and radioactive dust, but it's his hands that tell the real story. Clutched in his trembling fingers is a crumpled piece of paper, a radiation reading that shows levels so catastrophically high that they would have triggered immediate mass evacuations and international alerts. The paper shows a reading of 15,000 Roentgens per hour. To put this in perspective, a dose of 500 Roentgens over 5 hours is considered lethal to humans. The reading Petrovich held indicated radiation levels 30 times higher than what would kill a person in minutes. Yet this information never made it into official Soviet reports. Instead, authorities claimed radiation levels were slightly elevated and that the situation was under control. Petrovich's gesture, holding up this damning evidence, was captured by Igor Kostin, a photographer who had arrived at the scene before official censors could restrict access. Kostin, who would later become famous for his haunting images of the Chernobyl aftermath, understood immediately that he was documenting not just a nuclear accident, but a massive cover-up that would cost thousands of lives. The Soviet response to Chernobyl was shaped by 2 primary concerns: maintaining the facade of technological superiority that was central to communist propaganda, and preventing panic that could destabilize the already fragile Soviet system. Within hours of the explosion, KGB agents were dispatched to the scene with orders to control all information flowing from the disaster site. Scientists, engineers, and emergency workers were warned that discussing radiation levels or the true extent of the damage constituted treason against the state. But Petrovich and others like him found ways to resist. The photograph captures him in what appears to be a moment of communication with other plant workers, sharing the real radiation data despite explicit orders to remain silent. This act of courage, documenting and sharing the truth in defiance of state orders, represents one of the most significant acts of scientific whistleblowing in modern history. The true scale of the Chernobyl disaster began to emerge only when Swedish monitoring stations detected massive radiation spikes on April 28, 2 full days after the explosion. The Swedish government immediately demanded an explanation from Moscow, forcing Soviet authorities to acknowledge that an accident had occurred at a nuclear facility. Even then, official statements continued to minimize the severity of the situation. Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer who was in charge of the reactor on the night of the explosion, later admitted that he knew within hours that the reactor core had been completely destroyed. But pressure from Moscow forced him to maintain the official fiction that only minor damage had occurred. This deliberate misinformation delayed critical evacuation orders, exposed thousands of people to lethal radiation doses, and hampered international efforts to assess and respond to the crisis. The delayed evacuation of Pripyat represents one of the most tragic consequences of the Soviet cover-up. Despite radiation readings that clearly indicated the city was uninhabitable, residents were not evacuated until 36 hours after the explosion. During those crucial hours, children played in radioactive dust, families ate contaminated food, and thousands of people absorbed radiation doses that would affect their health for the rest of their lives. Petrovich himself was one of the victims of this cover-up. Despite his attempts to warn colleagues and superiors about the true danger, he was ordered to continue working in areas where radiation levels made survival impossible. He died of acute radiation syndrome just 18 days after the explosion, one of the first direct casualties of the disaster. His death was officially attributed to complications from burns, obscuring the fact that he had been killed by radiation exposure. That could have been prevented with proper protective equipment and honest information about the dangers. The photograph of Petrovich's final gesture has emerged as powerful evidence of how the Soviet system sacrificed individual lives to protect institutional credibility. Recent analysis using digital enhancement technology has revealed details that were invisible in the original image, including the specific radiation readings on the paper he held and the expressions of other workers in the background who clearly understood the magnitude of the disaster they were facing. Dr. Alay, a Ukrainian journalist who spent decades investigating the Chernobyl cover-up, discovered the photograph in 1991 while researching declassified Soviet documents. She immediately recognized its significance as evidence of how authorities had deliberately suppressed life-saving information. Her work helped expose the full extent of Soviet deception and contributed to international efforts to establish more transparent protocols for nuclear emergency response. The international implications of the Chernobyl cover-up extended far beyond the immediate disaster zone. The delayed and misleading information provided by Soviet authorities hampered efforts by neighboring countries to protect their populations from radioactive fallout. Poland, for example, was not warned about contaminated rainfall until after children had been exposed to dangerous levels of radioactive iodine, leading to increased rates of thyroid cancer that persist to this day. The cover-up also had profound effects on international nuclear policy and safety protocols. The revelation that a major nuclear power had been willing to conceal such a catastrophic accident led to the development of new international monitoring systems and emergency response procedures. The International Atomic Energy Agency established new requirements for immediate notification of nuclear accidents and created systems for sharing radiation monitoring data across borders. Within the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl disaster and its cover-up became symbols of the systemic dishonesty that characterized the communist system. Mikhail Gorbachev later acknowledged that Chernobyl was a major factor in his decision to implement glasnost, the policy of openness and transparency that ultimately contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. The disaster demonstrated that the Soviet system's obsession with secrecy and control had become a threat, not just to its own citizens, but to the entire world. The human cost of the Chernobyl cover-up continues to be debated, but most estimates suggest that thousands of people died prematurely as a result of radiation exposure. The true number may never be known because Soviet authorities deliberately falsified medical records and suppressed research into radiation-related health effects. Studies conducted after the fall of the Soviet Union revealed dramatically higher rates of cancer, birth defects, and other health problems in affected areas than had been officially acknowledged. The environmental impact of the disaster was similarly concealed and minimized. Soviet authorities claimed that radioactive contamination was limited to a small area around the plant, but satellite imagery and independent monitoring later revealed that radioactive fallout had spread across much of Europe. Agricultural products from contaminated areas continued to be sold without warning labels, exposing consumers to ongoing radiation risks. The Chernobyl disaster also revealed the inherent dangers of the RBMK reactor design used at the plant. Soviet engineers had known for years that this reactor type had serious safety flaws, including a tendency to become unstable at low power levels and the lack of a proper containment structure. But these concerns were suppressed because acknowledging design flaws would have undermined confidence in Soviet nuclear technology and required expensive modifications to existing plants. The photograph of Petrovich's gesture serves as a powerful reminder of the individual courage displayed by many Chernobyl workers who risked their lives and careers to expose the truth about the disaster. Plant workers, emergency responders, and scientists who spoke out about radiation dangers faced harassment, imprisonment, and career destruction. Many continued their efforts despite these threats because they understood that silence would cost even more lives. The legacy of the Chernobyl cover-up extends into contemporary debates about nuclear safety and transparency. The disaster demonstrated that technological risks cannot be properly managed without honest communication about dangers and failures. This lesson has influenced nuclear policy around the world, leading to stronger requirements for public disclosure and independent oversight of nuclear facilities. Recent digital analysis of the Chernobyl photograph has revealed additional details that were not visible in the original image. Enhancement technology has made it possible to read some of the text on the radiation measurement sheet that Petrovich held, confirming that the readings were far higher than officially acknowledged. The analysis has also revealed the presence of other documents and measurement devices in the background, suggesting that multiple workers were aware of the true extent of the disaster. The photograph has also provided new insights into the timeline of the cover-up. By analyzing the lighting, shadows, and other details in the image, researchers have been able to determine that it was taken approximately 6 hours after the explosion. During the critical period, when Soviet authorities were deciding how to respond to the crisis, the evidence suggests that high-level decisions to suppress information about radiation levels were made within hours of the accident, not days later, as previously believed. The discovery and analysis of this photograph has renewed interest in other potentially undiscovered documentation of the Chernobyl disaster. Researchers are now systematically reviewing thousands of photographs and documents from Soviet archives, using digital enhancement technology to uncover details that were previously invisible. This work has already yielded new evidence about the disaster's timeline, the extent of radiation exposure, and the scope of the cover-up. The story of Valery Petrovich and his final gesture has become a symbol of the individual courage required to confront institutional dishonesty. His willingness to document and share dangerous information, despite explicit orders to remain silent, represents the kind of moral courage that is essential for preventing future disasters. His death from radiation exposure serves as a reminder of the personal cost of speaking truth to power. The Chernobyl disaster and its cover-up continue to influence contemporary discussions about nuclear energy, government transparency, and corporate responsibility. The disaster demonstrated that complex technological systems require not just technical expertise, but also ethical leadership and honest communication about risks and failures. These lessons remain relevant as societies around the world grapple with the challenges of managing nuclear technology, climate change, and other technological risks. The photograph of Petrovich's final gesture stands as one of the most powerful pieces of evidence about the human cost of institutional dishonesty. It reminds us that behind every cover-up are individual human beings who suffer the consequences of decisions made by people in power. It challenges us to consider our own responsibilities when we become aware of dangerous information that authorities prefer to keep secret. Today, as the world continues to grapple with the legacy of Chernobyl and debates the future of nuclear energy, the image of Valery Petrovich holding his crumpled paper serves as a haunting reminder of what can happen when institutional interests take precedence over human safety. His gesture, frozen in time, continues to speak across the decades, bearing witness to the courage of those who risked everything to tell the truth about one of history's worst technological disasters. The story revealed by this photograph is not just about nuclear safety or Soviet politics. It is about the fundamental human struggle between truth and power, between individual conscience and institutional pressure. It reminds us that the most important moments in history are often captured not in official documents or government statements, but in the quiet acts of courage performed by ordinary people who choose to do what is right, regardless of the personal cost. In the end, the photograph of Valery Petrovich's final gesture serves as both a memorial to those who died at Chernobyl and a warning about the dangers of allowing secrecy and institutional self-interest to override public safety. It stands as evidence that the truth, no matter how carefully concealed, will eventually emerge, that the courage of individuals like Petrovich ensures that the victims of such disasters are not forgotten, and their sacrifices are not in vain.